What if the love of your life turned your world upside down with one shocking betrayal? This is the story of a marriage built on promises, shattered by secrets, and tested by a twist no one saw coming. From heartbreak to redemption, this tale dives deep into the chaos of broken trust, unexpected confrontations, and the strength it takes to rebuild. Every step reveals a new surprise, some painful, others empowering. You think you know someone, right? After 3 years of laughter, shared dreams, and whispered secrets, I thought Sandra and I were inseparable. Just a month ago, we stood at the altar promising forever. But forever, it turns out, has a cruel sense of humor. Little did I know the quiet text notifications and her sudden nostalgia for high school had a name. Brian. Yeah, the ex-boyfriend. The one she swore was ancient history. Our relationship had always felt like a fortress, solid and unshakable. But cracks started showing, subtle and insidious. Sandra's late-night reminiscing and wistful smiles made me uneasy, but I brushed it off. After all, who doubts someone they've built a life with? I should have seen the signs, but love makes fools of us all. When she said she needed space to think, I tried to be understanding. Space? We'd just started our lives together. My head spun with confusion, clinging to hope that this was just a phase. Deep down, though, an ache in my chest told me I was wrong. And that ache grew louder when she finally admitted it. Brian had resurfaced, and she couldn't resist the pull. She walked out of our home like it was no big deal, leaving behind a husband and a future we had barely begun to build. I remember staring at the door, waiting for it to swing back open. It never did. Instead, I was left with silence, questions, and the sinking realization that this wasn't just a rough patch. It was the end of the beginning. Looking back, I can't help but wonder if I missed the warning signs, or if there ever were any. Sandra and I started with a spark that felt undeniable. From the very first date, our conversations flowed effortlessly, and our dreams seemed to align perfectly. We talked about everything: careers, family, travel plans. She painted a picture of a future that felt so real I could almost touch it. For 3 years, we built what I thought was a solid foundation. Friends would comment on how lucky we were to have each other, and honestly, I believed them. We celebrated milestones, supported each other through tough times, and even made a little tradition of Sunday morning pancakes. It felt like we had our own little world, untouched by the chaos of everything outside. But perfection, it turns out, can be deceiving. I started noticing small shifts. A phone call she'd abruptly end when I walked into the room. A sudden disinterest in planning. Our honeymoon. At first, I chalked it up to wedding stress. Who wouldn't be overwhelmed planning such a big event? Still, something gnawed at the back of my mind, an unease I couldn't quite shake. It wasn't until much later that I realized those moments weren't random. They were breadcrumbs, leading to a truth I wasn't ready to face. And yet, even as I began piecing things together, I clung to the hope that our love was stronger than whatever was threatening to tear it apart. How could something so beautiful crumble so quickly? The day I found out felt like the air had been sucked from the room. I wasn't snooping. I never had a reason to doubt her before. But there it was, plain as day, a message from Brian that she hadn't bothered to delete. Just seeing his name on her phone sent a chill down my spine. My chest tightened as I read the words that confirmed my worst fears. Their catching up had been going on for months. I confronted her that same evening. My hands were shaking, my voice barely steady as I asked her to explain. At first she denied it, saying I was reading too much into things. But her face gave her away. When she finally admitted it, she tried to downplay the whole thing, calling it just old memories. Old memories don't keep someone up at night texting, do they? What hurt the most wasn't just the messages. It was the betrayal of trust. This wasn't just a one-time slip. It was calculated. Every shared laugh and intimate moment suddenly felt tainted. I couldn't believe the person I trusted most had been hiding something so significant. How could she be planning a wedding with me while emotionally reconnecting with someone else? As the days passed, I felt trapped in a storm of emotions: anger, sadness, disbelief. I wanted to forgive her, to move past this, but every time I tried, the image of their messages would creep back into my mind. And yet, even as the foundation of our relationship crumbled beneath me, I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. The wedding should have been the happiest day of my life, but looking back, it feels more like a cruel joke. Sandra smiled at me like nothing was wrong, like we weren't carrying the weight of her secrets down the aisle. I wanted to believe that this new chapter would somehow wipe the slate clean, that we could rebuild. But a month later, she shattered that illusion with 7 words. "I think I'm still in love with Brian." At first I thought I'd misheard her. How could she say that so casually, as if it didn't unravel everything we'd built? My initial reaction was to fight for us. I begged her to go to counseling, to give us a chance to work through this. But the more I tried, the more distant she became, as if her heart had already left. The day she handed me the divorce papers, I felt like a failure. Not just as a husband, but as a person. I had given her everything, my time, my love, my trust. Yet here I was, watching it all slip away. She looked almost relieved, which somehow hurt even more. Was this all just a mistake to her? Was I signing? Those papers felt like closing a door on a dream I wasn't ready to wake up from. I still held on to a sliver of hope, though, a foolish, desperate hope that she'd change her mind. But deep down, I knew the truth. Our story was over. Or at least I thought it was. It didn't take long for Sandra and Brian to make their reunion official. Social media has a way of rubbing salt in fresh wounds, doesn't it? One moment I was scrolling mindlessly. The next, there they were, smiling, holding hands, announcing their plans to move in together. It was like watching someone else live, the life I had imagined for us. Friends tried to reassure me, saying, "She'll regret it eventually," but it didn't feel that way. They moved quickly. New apartment, vacations, even a flashy engagement ring that made me wonder how much of this was genuine and how much was for show. I told myself I didn't care. But the truth? I couldn't stop the endless loop of what-ifs in my mind. Their wedding date was set almost immediately. Invitations went out. Pictures of venues and cake tastings followed. It was as if she wanted to erase me completely, fast-forwarding into a picture-perfect life with Brian. Every update felt like a jab, a reminder that I had been replaced, like I was just a stepping stone to her real happiness. But life has a funny way of flipping the script. On the day of their big celebration, I woke up feeling heavier than usual, bracing myself for the inevitable flood of photos. I couldn't have imagined what was about to happen. By that evening, whispers of what unfolded at their altar began, trickling in. And when I heard the full story, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When I first heard about the wedding disaster, I thought it was some cruel joke. But no, it was real, and it was brutal. Brian left Sandra standing at the ID altar in front of all their friends and family. He didn't just walk away quietly either. He gave a speech, a public, heart-stopping monologue about how she was still in love with me. I wasn't there, of course, but the details spread like wildfire. Apparently, Brian had found messages, old ones she had sent me during our divorce. He claimed they proved she had never truly let me go. The guests were stunned, and Sandra? I can only imagine the look on her face as her perfect day came crashing down. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, but honestly, I just felt numb. This wasn't how I wanted things to end for her, no matter how much she had hurt me. People started reaching out, some with pity, others fishing for gossip. I kept my replies short, unwilling to be dragged into the mess that wasn't mine anymore. Hearing about her public humiliation should have felt like closure, but instead, it opened old wounds. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the what-ifs, they all came rushing back. Yet there was also a strange sense of relief. Maybe this was the universe's way of balancing the scales, reminding us all that no one walks away unscathed. I wasn't expecting her to call, especially not after everything. But there she was, voice trembling, barely able to form a sentence. Sandra was desperate. She told me about the disaster at the altar, how Brian had walked out and the chaos that followed. Then she said something that stopped me cold. She wanted me to talk to him. "Please," she begged. If you could just explain... Explain what? That I was the man she left behind to chase a fantasy? That I somehow still cared enough to fix this for her? The audacity of the request made my chest tighten. I was no longer part of her life, and yet here she was, asking me to clean up the mess she made. For a brief moment, I almost considered it. Old habits die hard, I guess. There was a part of me that still wanted to be her hero, to be the person she could rely on. But then reality hit me like a ton of bricks. Why should I step into the wreckage of a relationship that had nothing to do with me? I told her no, calmly, firmly, but without any room for negotiation. I don't owe you this, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She cried, and for a second I almost wavered, but I knew this was the right choice, for both of us. It was time for her to face the consequences of her decisions. Not long after our call, I started hearing whispers. Mutual friends, old acquaintances, they all seemed to have an update on Sandra's state. She wasn't handling things well. Brian's public rejection had sent her into a downward spiral, and now, her once confident and polished demeanor was unraveling before everyone's eyes. People began blaming me, can you believe that? You should have helped her, they said, as if I somehow held the key to her recovery. It was infuriating. Did they forget who she left standing in the rubble? I wasn't the villain in this story, yet here I was, painted as the bad guy for protecting my own peace. Her collapse wasn't just emotional, it was visible. She stopped showing up to work, shut down her social media, and reportedly spent days locked in her apartment. Part of me wanted to reach out, to offer some kind of support, but another part of me knew it wouldn't help. Sandra needed to face her own reflection and come to terms with her choices. I stayed silent, though the guilt lingered like a shadow. Watching someone you once loved fall apart isn't easy, even when you know you're not to blame. Still, I couldn't let her pain pull me back into a cycle I'd fought so hard to escape. She wasn't my responsibility anymore. I wasn't expecting to see her again, not like this. She showed up unannounced, standing on my doorstep with tears streaming down her face. Sandra looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew. I need to talk, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Against my better judgment, I let her in. She apologized over and over, her words tumbling out like a flood she couldn't control. She admitted everything, her regrets, her mistakes, the lies she told herself to justify what she'd done. It was strange hearing her take accountability after all this time. For a moment, I felt the weight of my anger begin to lift. I listened, but I kept my guard up. As much as I wanted to comfort her, I knew where that road led. She asked if we could start over, but I shook my head. I forgive you, I said, and I meant it. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean going back. When she left, I felt a strange sense of closure. There were no dramatic declarations, no promises of reconciliation, just two people acknowledging the pain they'd caused and the lessons they'd learned. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was ready to move on. The days after Sandra's visit felt different, lighter somehow. For the first time in years, I wasn't consumed by questions of what went wrong or what could have been. It was like closing a book I had been too afraid to finish. The story was over, and I was finally ready to write a new one. I started focusing on myself in ways I hadn't in years. I poured energy into my career, taking on projects I had always pushed aside. My friendships, neglected during the chaos of my marriage, became a source of strength. I realized how much I had isolated myself, and reconnecting felt like rediscovering a part of me that had been lost. It wasn't all smooth sailing. Healing never is. But each day brought a small victory, whether it was a laugh shared with friends or simply enjoying a quiet moment without the weight of the past hanging over me. Slowly, I began to see the possibilities ahead instead of the mistakes behind me. Looking forward, I'm not entirely sure what the future holds, but for the first time in a long while, I'm excited to find out. There's freedom in starting, fresh, in letting go of the past and embracing whatever comes next. And this time I'm determined to build something stronger, something unshakable.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.